Hello and welcome to another one. Excuse me. I want to talk today. Consider this a bit of an op-ed on black men's mental health. I know I'm a tad bit late, as Men's Mental Health Awareness Month was June, and to be frank, I had no idea it even existed. I heard of Women's Mental Health Month before, which I guess if I was really took the moment to think, like, if there's a Women's Mental Health Month, there must be a Men's Mental Health Month, but I've never heard anybody say anything about it before. And it was just a random post from a friend on LinkedIn. I want to talk about why black men's mental health kind of gets downplayed. Some of the things that we have to face, and how those things might affect it, black men. My only ask for this one is, if you have certain preconceived biases, don't be so quick to have that knee-jerk reaction if something I say may conflict with your worldview. Excuse me. So, that aside, I want to dive into it, or rather begin to explore it. I probably will come back with a more in-depth, more thought-out video at some later point, but right now, this is just kind of me freestyling. For a lot of black men, one of the things that does increase a lot of stress that contributes to those frustrations that some struggle with. To put it, how to best to put it? I would say a lot of black men deal with the concept of being a human doing. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people's relationship to masculinity and manhood is through task, and not through anything based upon character, but task. And that can be exceedingly difficult at times when, we get pinned as being part of the patriarchy, when those people who makes those claims thinks that just because you have a dick swinging, you're inherently patriarchal, when no, that is not the case. A patriarchy, just to kind of keep it brief, a patriarchy includes an in-group of men and an out-group of men. The in-group targets those who are not part of the in-group, which black men by and large are targeted in America. And there are a lot of things you can go to see the effects of that targeting. And where it comes into with the task portion is, we have a very narrow concept of masculinity, or some do, I should say, in which if you're able to do a particular task, like work on the car, do some type of stuff installing hardware around the home, so on and so forth. If you're able to be the classical provider, then you have passed the bar for manhood. And conversely, if you can't, or if you have difficulty with those things, you're perceived in some ways as being defective. Something's wrong with you. And because of that relationship to task, it can be very frustrating. And then this is where, for younger folks in particular, because I would say my generation was the one where a lot of that knowledge and things that some of them talk about stereotypically, like cars and carpentry and some of these things, my generation was the last to kind of have those things readily available in school, and that's more so a rarity now. I took wood shop. I have the most absolutely basic understanding of carpentry. I took auto shop. I was around my granddad when he worked on his car. I was around my dad when he worked on his car. I got a lot of knowledge of cars from working on my '06 Chevy Cobalt, because everything on that freaking car seemed like it broke at some point. And I did a lot of the repairs myself. A young man probably likely doesn't find himself with those same resources, with those same abilities, necessarily. And a lot of times there's this perception that if a guy doesn't know some of these things, there's something wrong with him. When it's no. He was never taught these things. It's not like you just hop out the womb and it's like, yep, I know exactly how to break down that engine block on that 87 Chevelle. It's like, no, that is not how anything works. You cannot draw upon knowledge that you have not been taught, that you have not ingested. And I feel that leads to a great deal of frustration for a lot of young men, especially when you get, like I said, when you start skewing a little bit younger, because their generations didn't even have these things in high school, by and large, to be able to draw upon. And not only that, we're in a different world too. I have knowledge of cars. I can sort of kind of bump around, fiddle my way, and make something happen. But the reality of it is this too. My granddad was able to pretty much do everything on his car. Same thing with my dad. These modern cars are not the same. They are not the same beast. And honestly, I do think in a lot of cases you could probably, if you don't fully know what you're doing, you could probably make some bigger problems for yourself down the road, depending on what it is that you're doing. But beyond that, we also, I feel, don't have much empathy for the stressors of manhood as a black society. There's this perception that, going back to that patriarchal thing, this kind of branches off of it a bit. There's this perception that, from an intersectional standpoint, black women go through everything black men do, but they also experience sexism, and thus they, I guess you could say, get more knocked by society than their male counterparts, which for females is absolutely not true. Black men experience sexism, and they experience sexism in a multitude of ways. The whole concept of black male privilege I find to be an utterly insulting, smooth-brained, I'm not gonna go all the way there, but I find it to be so absolutely ludicrous. The majority of homicide victims, the majority of suicide victims, or perpetrators, however you want to put it, the majority of the homeless, the majority that serve in the military and military casualties, the majority of workplace accidents and fatalities, it's all men. That's the thread of commonality that they have. And when you put those things into context, along with the fact that when it comes to being assaulted and slain by the state, once again, that's black men right there. These things are not privileges, and there's very little, if any, privilege that emerges when you get into the numbers of the black society. Yes, black men earn more, but there's more going on there than I really feel the numbers portray, which is that a lot of women from time to time do have career breaks. A lot of women tend to not as aggressively negotiate, and I don't think it's a product of bias or preference for black men. I think it's really just some of those extra factors of womanhood coming into play, which reduces their availability in relation to men at certain points in the career journey. Honestly, we don't frame a lot of what black men go through a lens of sexism, but we should begin thinking of it in those terms. Dr. T, I'm not sure if it's the term he coined or if he just has adopted it in his work, but anti-black misandry. He wrote about it in his book Solutions for Anti-Black Misandry, Black Male Death, and I can't remember the whole thing. It's a long title. But all of that aside, he went into the various facets of society, from the home to the broader society, touching on some of those things such as education, the judicial system, so on and so forth. How a lot of times black men are coming up short, not because there's some innate defect, which I feel is the prevailing narrative of a lot of society, but simply because a lot of folks have been disregarded by the system, by the powers that be. And as a result, you have folks who haven't had a chance to really get that footing, get that help, get that support that they need to be successful. And a lot of black men, a lot of the ones that we point to that are successful, whether in our personal lives or whether you want to talk about those pop figures, looking at the data, there's a very good argument to be made that a lot of black men, when we succeed in spite of. And that is something that we have to really grapple with. We have to really truly invest in our young boys and men. You can't get out what you don't put in. And I feel that we as Black America are heading to a point where things are going to get real ugly. And we're going to need the next generation of strong black men in order to weather what's coming. Then my final point as to why it's not as big a deal as it probably should be is black men have not been taught, or black men rarely exercise thinking of themselves in purely selfish terms. And what I mean by that is this. A lot of times if you ask a black man, like, hey man, what do you need? A lot of times we will say a few things for ourselves, but it's generally not long before our response begins to become this, it begins to focus on those around us that are connected to us, whether it's, spouses, girlfriends, children, family, friends, the greater community. And this is something that I think is really common. I've noticed it, not only with myself, but with a lot of the black men who I'm friends with, who even I've coached and mentored on the job in my management roles. One of my directors even pointed it out to me once. He would always ask me at the end of our one-on-ones, "Hey Dre, what do you need?" And I would always say like, "Hey, I'm just trying to get the team to this particular place. I need X, Y, and Z. I want to make sure I want to get this person exposure. I want to get this person's some additional skills and training to increase that mobility, this, that, the third." And I remember one day he pulled me to the side. He was like, "I hear you, and I always provide what I can." He's like, "But I'm asking for you." And I was like, "Yeah, that is for me." He's like, No. You personally, not your team. You." And I was a bit taken aback, but it was happening unconsciously. I wasn't even aware of it until he brought it to the forefront. And because of that selflessness, and I would say even the emotional stoicism that a lot of us develop as a bit of a coping and defense mechanism, it can be easy for someone to suffer and not speak up. There's this notion sometimes that men aren't emotional or anything like that, and I think it's so very far from the truth. It's a misunderstanding of what people mean, generally speaking, or originally meant, in my opinion, when they say like, "Oh, one sex is more emotional than the other." Men are very emotional, but we aren't emotionally volatile. And what I mean by that is it's really rare to see someone who is fluctuating from these different emotional states very quickly, without some immense catalyst. Like, if a guy is super happy or just happy in general, like, it's kind of rare that you're gonna see their mood where like they're melancholy. Sometime after, unless like generally something big has happened, or it's the anniversary or something big, so type of deal. It is excuse me. And it is one of those things that, because a lot of guys don't necessarily speak up for themselves and don't necessarily have that outlet, more importantly, to be able to express themselves all the time, a lot of things end up getting held in. And even the act of sharing emotion to like what's bothering you, what's troubling you. You can ask a lot of guys, like they will tell you that in a lot of guys' experience, sharing emotions is a very precarious thing. And it's one of those things which a lot of people say, or I put it like this, a lot of women say they want somebody who's emotionally expressive and this, that, the third to them, but they don't really mean that. And this is what I mean by this. A lot of times, the guy who expresses himself will sometimes find that information that he shared when he was troubled, when things weren't going well, comes back to essentially bite him in the ass. And because of that, sometimes guys will close off because that information was shared, then it was weaponized against them. And it doesn't feel safe to express and share. So, in conclusion, I feel that we have to develop a greater degree of empathy for black men and the black man's experience. We have to actually create safety, whether it's amongst ourselves as black men, or whether it's getting sisters to actually empathize and understand that black men go through some serious stuff too. And sometimes we need somebody to be able to talk to. That's not saying you're a therapist. That's not saying you're anything. That is saying that you're simply a decent human being who somebody can come to, who can, share what they're going through. That's part of for most would say that's part of the human experience. That's part of being a friend. That's part of being friendly. That's part of being in a relationship. But I'll leave it right there. I know it's a lot I probably didn't get to or mention, but share your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Peace. Hope you have a great one.